So in this session, we'll discuss the concept of client libraries. Okay. So what does it mean by the client libraries and why we use the client libraries? So before understanding client libraries, so client libraries usually manage our CSS and JS. So whatever the HTML I want to write, so where I'll write the HTML in the components.html file. So in the components.html file only, I can write the CSS and JS as well. So, but it is not recommended to include your UI part inside the component. Okay. So if you want to handle the CSS and JS, so with the help of AEM client libraries, we can handle the CSS and JS part. So why to go for a client library? So I can write in the .html file. So it will compile and then it will execute, but what is the need for the client libraries? Okay, so in order to understand the client libraries, so first understand the traditional structure how the server will receive a request. Okay, so suppose whenever I load a web page, okay, so how this is the traditional way of using the CSS and the JS. So inside the .html file, inside the head tag, if I want to link the CSS, okay, if I want to add the external CSS file, so then with the help of link tag we can do that. So with the help of link, I can add an external CSS file, and with the help of the script tag, I can add an external JS file, right? So which you will be specifying that inside the head tag of the HTML. Okay, so this is a traditional way how we include CSS and the JS part for in the front end. Okay, so when you are going for this traditional way, so number of requests for the server will increase. Okay, suppose if I go for a web page, so I'll not only have one HTML, right? So I have multiple HTMLs for multiple things. We'll be writing multiple JS as well, multiple CSS files as well. We'll be creating in order to structure your web page. Okay, suppose if I go for any web page. Okay, so now if I go for this web page, so right now maybe a lot of CSS files and lot of JS files would be included, right, inside in order to get the functionalities or in order to get the styles as well. A lot of CSS would be available to these components. So now to this particular content, so every time when I'm sending a request, so this request the server should retrieve all the HTML, CSS and JS. So it needs to retrieve all the things. So whenever we are going for this traditional architecture, so suppose if you are consider if you are having some 100 CSS files, okay. So in the particular project we are creating, we have 100 CSS files, or in the particular web page contains the 100 CSS files and 100 JS files it is containing. So in this case, what happens at one time a server can retrieve one file only. Okay, so once we are making a request, so that request will fetch only one file from the server. So server can fetch only one file. So now in order to fetch all these 200 files, 100 files of CSS and 100 files of JS, so how many requests it will take to the server? 200 requests it will take to retrieve all the CSS and the JS part, or else 198, because in the initial request it will fetch one file. Okay, so it is making a lot of calls to the code base in order to fetch a lot of details. Okay, in order to fetch an each and every file. So here number of requests to the server will increase, because we need to make a, so it is internally making a lot of requests, so number of requests for the server will increase if you are going for the traditional way. Okay, so and then dependency management should take care manually. So what does it mean by the dependency management? Okay, so right now we are having a lot of files, right? So these lot of files may internally depend on one another. Okay, suppose if I want something, so this something has been written in one more CSS file. Okay, so that is called as a dependency. So suppose if I call the first CSS file, so this first CSS file, maybe some content is depend in the second CSS file, right? So this particular dependency management also should take care manually. And third one is minification needs to take care manually. So minification is nothing but, so when you are writing a lot of CSS and JS, so how you will write? So we'll write maybe small properties. So CSS are very small properties. So background color, and then you will specify one value of it, maybe all hashes you will specify. So right, whatever, whenever you are creating like that, when you are specifying the background color, so it will occupy the entire line, but the content in the entire line would be very less. Okay, so that means suppose if it is occupying this entire line, so maybe only 15 to 20 characters it is occupying. Okay, but internally we are wasting up a lot of space. Okay, so that it will be taken care. So how to check? So if you want to see the minified CSS file, so you can just go there and just search for minified CSS file. Okay. Uh, So if you go for a minified version of a CSS file, so this is how a minified version of CSS file would look like. Okay, so no spaces, no content gaps in between them. So here, if you observe here, so every file will return. Suppose I'll write the return statement one place, or I'll write the prototype in one line. So it internally, in order to remove all the blank spaces, we'll be minifying the CSS files so that it will save a lot of memory. So in order to get this minification as well, so this minification also should taken care manually. So these are the three disadvantages if you are going for the if you are going to create the client libraries in a manual way. So number of requests for the server will increase, and then dependency management should take care manually, and minification also should take care manually. So now in order to resolve these issues, AEM has created a concept called client library. Okay, so client libraries are used to manage our CSS, JS as well as fonts as well. So fonts are nothing but so it will also manage the fonts as well. So in some cases, if you want to manage your images as well, so in most of the cases, we'll be going for the assets console. But if you are having some small images, so then we can handle those small images with the help of client libraries as well. So it is used for to manage the CSS and the JS part. So whenever you are creating a client library, so we are obviously will be creating a node. So because inside the JCR, we'll be creating the node only. So the primary type of the node should be CQ colon client library folder. Okay. So primary type of client library folder is CQ colon client library folder. So first, how it will resolve all those issues which are available. Okay. So first one is number of requests to the server will number of requests to the server we need to make if you are going for the traditional way. So how this client library will solve those requests. Okay. So once if you are going for a request, so maybe consider this is the server. Okay. So this server is making a request. Okay. So it will obviously request for a HTML file, and the HTML file will load the content of CSS as well as JS as well. So once the user is requesting, so this request will go to the server, and from the server where it will go to the publish instance or the so once it goes to the publish instance, who is responsible to serve this request? Apache Sling is responsible to serve this request. So whenever this Apache Sling sees a request, so directly it will go there and then it will execute this .txt file. Okay, so js.txt file and css.txt files will be executed. So what does this txt files will contain? So this txt files will contain the file names of the source files. Okay, so this is how we have to create a structure. Okay, so whenever we are creating a client library, so we have to create two mandatory folders. One is js.txt mandatory files, one is js.txt, and second one is css.txt. So these two mandatory files we have to create, because every time when Apache Sling receives a request in order to fetch the CSS and JS, so at that time it will fetch the CSS and JS part from this txt files only. If it is a CSS request, so then css.txt will be executed. If it is a JS request, js.txt will be executed. But inside this text txt files, you will be not writing the actual JS, okay, or the actual CSS you will be not writing. So you'll have a lot of files, right? So maybe if you are having 100 files, so those 100 files you will be mentioning here. Okay, so that I contain this file. So file 2 is this one, file 3 is this one. So you'll just mention the other files names inside this txt file. And once you got this txt file, so where the actual files will be there, so we have to create two more folders in order to manage your CSS file as well as the JS files. So all your 100 folders which are there, so all the 100 folders will be managed inside this CSS source files and CSS JS source files. So whatever the files that are there in these source files, so they will be not executed directly. Okay. So if you want to execute them, so what we need to do? So we need to specify in the txt files. So when you specify them in the txt files only, they will be executed. So otherwise, they will not be executed. Okay. So whenever we are running a request, the request will directly go to the Apache Sling. Apache Sling will execute this dot txt files. So js.txt and css.txt are the mandatory files to manage the CSS and JS files. So as if you observe here, inside the txt files, what I'm mentioning, what we are specifying inside this txt files, whatever the folder names or file name I'm having, all the file names we will be specifying in here. So once we specify the file names inside these txt files, so if I'm having 100 files, within a single request, it will load all the 100 files. Okay. So you'll see how it will load all the 100 files in a single request. So we'll go there and we'll try to create an client library folder. Okay. So where can I create? Inside the CRXD. So go to CRXD and then you'll have your component inside the CRXD. So we should not work on content mode. In the apps folder, we need to work, right? Because our actual project will be available in the apps folder. So content of the project would be available in the content folder. Okay. So go to apps and then, so we have two places to create a client library folder. Okay. So first one is at the global level and second one is at the local level. Okay. So with these two places, we can create a client library folder. So if I go for Marvel is my project. And if I go inside components, suppose for the Marvel form is the component we have discussed yesterday, right? So for this component, if I want to create a client library folder, I can directly create here. So which becomes a local level. Okay, so if you are creating in the component node, so then it becomes a local level. So but AEM has provided one more folder to manage all your client libraries. So if you are creating inside this client library folder, then it becomes a global level. So right now we'll try to create the client library folder in a global level. Okay, so just right click on it and then create a node. Okay. So node name should be, so node name can be anything, but it is recommended to have as an client lib only. Okay. So client libs hyphen desktop is one client library folder I am creating. Okay. So once I click on OK, is it fine? We have to specify the type. So what type it should be? CQ colon client library folder. So whenever you are creating, so this should be the primary type. Okay, so CQ colon client library folder. Okay, now I have created the client library folder. Okay, so client lib cipher desktop is the client library folder I have created. So in order to specify this one, okay, so what are the two mandatory child we have to create? .txt files we have to create. So one is to manage the CSS. So CSS dot txt, and then second one is js dot txt. So these two files we have to create. Okay. So in order we can write the code as well directly here, but it is not recommended. So to manage all our CSS files, we need to create one folder. Okay. So name it as CSS and then create one more folder to manage your JS part. Okay. And then name it as JS. So this is the CSS folder and then this is the JS folder. Okay. So now whatever the content I want to create, so for the components only, right, we can write the styles. For the data only, we can write the styles. So in order to write the styles, how we can go? So I'll go for this form.html only. So inside this form.html, so we have injected some content. We have injected an image and then we have injected uh, title, description, a lot of things we have injected. So I'll keep them all inside one container and then I'll create a class. Okay. So div. So I have created one class. With the help of that class, we can write an styles to that particular block. So this is one block, div block I have created. So to this div block, I can write the styles. Okay. So content container is nothing but the class I have created. Okay. So just you can copy this class name and then go to the CSS source files because I want to create a CSS file. So just go to the CSS source file and then right click on it, create a file for this particular one. Okay. So click on create a file and you can name it as anything. Okay. So I'll name it as Marvel form is my component, right? So Marvel form dot CSS because it is a CSS file. You have to manage the extension as dot CSS. Okay. So inside this CSS file, we'll write some content. So what content we can write? So how to call that class and how can I write the styles for it? Dot class name. So dot class name and then inside this one, whatever the content I want to write, so I can write the content. So just specify any styles, background. Okay, so this is one background color I have applied. Okay, suppose if I want to get other as well, so we can get the other ones. Is the property name correct? Background color. Okay, so this is one CSS I have written. Okay, so just I'll also use the same CSS while creating one more file. So right click on it, create a file, and then okay, so Marvel demo dot CSS is one more file I'm creating, and then container one. So to get a different name. So when it comes to the JS files, for the JS as well, I'll create two more files. Right click on it, and then create a file, and then I'll create a variable. So where a is equals to 120, and then so this is some simple JS I have written. I have just created a variable and then I'm printing that variable in the console.log. Okay, now it's done. Okay, so now I have written the JS and then I have written the CSS as well. Consider if I'm having a lot of files. So all the files you can create inside this CSS. So in order to check whether your when I make a request, so in order to check whether your client library is working or not, so simply you can copy the path of this client library. Okay, so copy the path of this client library and then go to localhost colon 4502 and paste the path. So if I want to execute the CSS, if I want to call the CSS, then you have to mention extension as dot CSS. So it will load all the CSS files. Okay. So right now I have written two CSS files. Okay. But when I make a request with the dot CSS, why it is not executing the CSS files or why I can't see the content here? So we can see, we need to see the content here. So why? Because, so whenever I make a request, okay, so this request will be going towards the CRXD and then once the Apache Sling, so what Apache Sling will execute? So Apache Sling will execute these TXT files. So css.txt and js.txt files it will execute. But in this case, if I go inside this txt files, so these are empty. Okay, so in order to execute the files you have created, so those files we have to mention inside this txt files. So then only they will be executed. Okay, so in order to specify them here, you can simply call like this. Okay, so what is the folder name? So CSS is the folder name. So uh, CSS slash Marvel uh, form dot CSS. Okay, so CSS is the folder name, and then inside that folder we have one thing called as an marvel form dot css. So if you are not good with the spellings, you can just copy and paste them. And after that, if I want to go there, so if I want to execute one more file as well, so then you have to mention css slash marvel demo dot css and then save the changes. So now if I go there, so as we have done for the CSS, so the same thing we have to mention for the JS as well, right? So just go to the js.txt and make a request. Okay, so js slash, okay, so marvel form.js and marvel demo.js. Okay, so now if I go there and if I refresh the request, so right now it is executing both the files. Okay, so not only some content, right now we have just for the demo purpose, we have just written few lines of code. Okay, so if you're having 100 lines or 1,000 lines of CSS, so within a single request, it can load all the files. Okay, so if you right now we are having two files, create one more file and try to check whether the content is loading or not. Okay, so we can create n number of files and those n number of files will be executed within a single request. So now in a single request, it is loading the content from two files. Suppose if I want to execute JS, so then you have to call dot .js. So dot .js is also executing two files at the same time. Okay. So right now, if you observe here, now, whenever we are mentioning something is inside this css.txt and the js.txt, so they follow something called as an precedence. Okay, so precedence is nothing but whatever the way you have specified. Okay, so right now I have specified marvel.form.css, marvel.form.css as the first file. So it will be executed first. Okay, so it will follow the precedence. Suppose if I specify marvel demo, so then demo will be executed first. So it will follow the order whatever you have mentioned. So in the that applies for the js.txt as well. So right now, suppose we are having two files. Okay, consider now we are having two files. So when we are having two files, then it is comfortable, right? So every time writing the folder name, it is comfortable. Suppose if I'm having 100 files, so every time it is not possible, right? So I can't specify css slash marvel form.css. So this is the same thing we are specifying multiple times. So which is not required. So in that case, here also we can add one more thing called as an hashtag include. Okay, so hash include is equals to css. So when I specify hash include is equals to css, so by defaultly whatever the files we have mentioned here, so those files it will check inside the css folder only. Okay, so the when that css.txt is there, so hash include css we are specifying, so then it will go there and it will check whether these files are available. So if the files are available, it will execute. So you have to mention like this, hash include is equals to css. Save the changes and try to refresh again. So instead of css dot yes, so it is not executing. That means hash hash mode is equals to css. Base yes, not include hash base yes. Hash base is equals to css. So now it is including. So not include base. Okay. So hashtag base is equals to CSS. You have to mention. Okay. So if you want to execute for same thing as well, hash base is equals to JS. Okay. So within a single request, it will fetch both the all the files. It will fetch. Okay. So right now we have added the CSS and we have added the JS as well to this particular one. Okay. So for the class names also we have created, right? So that means whatever the content we are having, so this content should reflect to the component. Okay, so inside for the component, right, we have created this class. So in order to reflect this content to the component, so first we'll check whether it is reflecting or not. So go to sites and then in the EN page, we have added that component. Okay, so this is the component we have added. So Marble form is the component we have created. But whatever the styles we have written, so those styles have not been appearing to this component. Okay, so here, whenever you are creating a client library, okay, so if you want to execute that client library, we have to include them. Okay, so we have to include the client library first. So in order to include the client library as well, we have two ways. So first one is global level, and second one is at the local level. So in order to include that at local level, so you can go to the component, and inside the component, we have one HTML code, HTML code we are having. So with the help of that HTML code, we can easily include the client library. Okay. So in order to include the client library, you can just go to the page component and then open anything. So custom footer lips. So here we have an option. Here we have the code already present. So just copy this code and then uh, go to your HTML file, and inside this HTML file, just paste this one. Okay, so here we have to make few changes. So in this statement, so with the help of data hyphen sly hyphen call, so they are including your client libraries. Okay, so here they are specifying clientlips.js and then at the rate categories is equals to marvel.base. So what does it mean by this categories? Okay, so categories is one property which we can add to the client libraries. Okay, so this is the node name. Okay, so this client lib hyphen desktop is the node name. So if you want to name your client libraries, so then with the help of the categories property, we can name the client library. So go to the main client lib hyphen desktop, and inside this client lib hyphen desktop, add one property which is called as an categories. So categories is nothing but which is used to name your client library. And then it can be more than one value. So there is no need, we can specify only one name. So we can specify more than one name. So select the name as a string. So the type is string, and then you can give any name. So Marvel hyphen desktop. So Marvel hyphen desktop is the name we are giving, and then it is a multi-field. Okay, not a single field. It is a multi-field because we can add more than one number. Okay, we can give more than one name to the client library. So that's why we have to select the option as multi, and then click on add. Suppose if you want to give a different name, so then you can just click on plus, and then we can give a different name. So with the help of the categories property, we can give the name to the client library folder. So now in this case, inside this marvel.html file, so if I want to execute this client lips hyphen desktop, so then how can I include? So I have to call marvel hyphen desktop. Okay, so this is the name of the client library. I have to call this client library. So at the rate categories is equals to Marvel hyphen desktop. And here we are having one more thing. So right now here we are specifying clientlib.js. Okay. So whenever you are specifying like this, only JS file will be executed. Okay. Suppose if I want to execute the JS, if I want to execute the CSS file, so then you have to mention so clientlib.css. If you want to execute JS, then you will be specifying clientlib.js. Okay. Suppose if you want to execute the both. Okay, so if you want to execute both, at that case, you'll be specifying clientlibs.all. So then it will execute both the CSS file and the JS file as well. It will execute. So right now, save the changes and try to refresh the EN page. Okay, it is not applying, or else just go to preview and then inspect. Okay, so it is applying the content container. Okay, so if you observe here, clientlib hyphen desktop dot css, because hashtag all has whites is equals to the color would be white. Suppose if I want a different color here, so then you can specify the color name actual white. Okay, so now it is applying the color. So other properties also we can add. Suppose if you want to have this, CSS or HTML, right? So just try to get this to the center and then try to appear the text on the left and then image on the right. Okay, so do that your part. So now in order to specify them, so we can write with in order to include the client library. So at the local level, so with the help of this HTML code, we can include the client library at a local level. So we'll change the color. So 6 hashes means the color will be white. Okay. So we can specify different values. We can specify number value. We can specify hash coded value. So different values we can specify when it comes to the CSS values. Okay. So now if I refresh again, the color would be changed. The color would be permanent. If you are writing something on the inspect, so that is for the temporary purpose. Okay. Okay, so it is applying the hash only. So maybe we have changed it in different way. Okay, so we have changed in the container one, but it is applying container. Okay, so that is how we can include the client library folder at a local level. Okay, suppose if I want to include at a global level, so where is the place to include at a global level? Okay, so if you want to include your client library folder at a global level, so that we can do at the template level. Okay, so at the template level, we can include the client library folder. So right now we are in the page, right? So from this page, if I want to go to the template, how can I go? How can I, from this page, if I want to go to the template, so how can I go to the template?
Page management,
Middle one. It is called page information. So
page
go to page
information.
information, and inside the page information, we have an option of edit template. So go inside this edit template option, and then wait till it loads. Okay. So again, go to the page information tab, and here we have an option of page policy. So go inside this page policy. So here we can include your client libraries. Okay. So if you want to include your client library CSS file, so in the above, you can include the CSS. So if you want to include the JS, so then in the second part, we can include the JS. So just click on add and try to call your client clips. So what is your name of the client clips? So Marvel hyphen desktop. So it would be automatically available here. And you have the JS as well, right? So you can include the JS as well. So Marvel hyphen desktop. And once you click on OK, and then go to the EN page and refresh the page. And now the client lib is also added at the global level. So at the template page policy, we can add the client library at a global level. Okay, so these are the two ways we can add the client library at a global level. Suppose if you want to check whether the client library has included or not, so you can just make a request here. So at the rate, so go to the view as published option, and inside this view as published option, so right click on it, click on view page source. Okay, so go to view page source, and inside this page source, so search for your client lib. So Marvel hyphen desktop should be your client library, or client lib hyphen desktop, right? Your node name is the client lib hyphen desktop, so that will be executed. So client lib hyphen desktop. So here we are having client lib hyphen desktop dot js and client lib hyphen desktop dot css. So if I click on this, and then that will take your client library. So it is executing the JS as well as it is executing the CSS as well. So if you observe something here, so if you check the path, okay, so link style sheet is equals to href apps marvel client library client libs hyphen desktop. So good, it's good because it is pointing towards our client library folder only. But whenever we are configuring dispatcher, okay, so dispatcher is one configuration, so which have a security. Okay, so dispatcher acts as a security layer to the AEM. So whenever the user is requesting for this page, so in this page we have the direct request. Okay, so apps is a direct request. Okay, so whereas they don't have any access to apps, but it becomes a direct request to access. So every time whenever the dispatcher sees the direct request, it will block all the direct requests. Okay, so we should not specify the direct paths. We have to make these paths as an relative paths. Okay, so in order to make them as a relative paths, so here we have to add one more property to the client clips, which is called this hello proxy. Hello hello proxy. So hello proxy, and then the value is a boolean. Okay, so hello proxy and property is boolean, and then value is true. So it is a single field only. Deselect the multi option and then save the changes. So hello boxy boolean true. So now go to the page source and try to refresh it. So once you have refreshed it, if you observe the request, it has changed it from apps to etc. Okay, so when it is changing from etc, then it becomes an relative path, not an absolute path. It becomes an relative path. So dependency, right now I can load multiple number of files and then I can also skip the security reasons as well. So second thing we have to discuss is about the dependency management. Okay. So dependency is nothing but one client library is depending on other client library. Okay. So in order to manage your dependency, so here we have to add one more property called as an dependencies. Okay, so dependencies is one property. So where I can add the client like dependent client library. So it is the value is a string and then it is an array. So one client library can be depended on more than one more client library. So right now client libs dot hyphen is dependent upon client libs dot site. Okay. So at that time go to the site and then here we have to specify the name of the client library we are dependent on. So marvel dot site is the name, right? So now with the help of dependencies property, so dependency and then value should be marvel dot site and then click on add. So once you add this dependency and if I load this page, so that dependent client library also would be added. Okay, so if you observe here, so right now it has added the dependent client library as well. So client lib hyphen site. Okay, so here also client lib hyphen site.js. So the dependent client library also added. So but there is an issue while using this dependency property. Why? Because suppose if a user is there or if an other programmer is there, not a programmer, if external person is there. Okay. So now if the external person also can have the access to these tools because these are developer tools. Okay. So view page source or inspect, these are all the developer tools. So when I'm going to this developer tools, I have a lot of structure. So this structure is nothing but the structure of my page, structure of my EN page. So inside the structure of the EN page, he can see what all the requests are making here. Okay. So if he has a knowledge on AEM, so then he can simply know that. So this is one client library desktop, and then this client library desktop is dependent on client library side. So why? Because whenever we are using the dependency property, so when before loading our client library, it will load the dependent client library. Okay. So I am now this client libs hyphen desktop is dependent on client libs hyphen site. Okay. So that's why this client lib hyphen site has been loading. Okay. So that's why only it is loading before the we have included the client library. So this is also something we need to avoid. So if this client lib hyphen desktop is dependent on other client libs as well, it should not load the other file. Okay. So it should load only my file and internally it can refer to any file. Okay. Whatever the things I have mentioned, internally it can refer. But when it comes to the outside request, it should refer only to the main client library. So in order to do that, in order to avoid this situation, so here we have one more property which is called as an embed. Okay. So embed is also the same thing which is used to include the dependent client library. So both embed and dependency both are same. So which is used to include the dependent client library so that we can't use them in the same one. Okay. So just delete them and then try to add. So embed and dependency. So now if I click on, if I refresh this page source, so if you observe here, the dependent client library has been removed. Okay. So why? Because, so if you are using an embed option, so internally it will load the dependent client library, but when it comes to appearing to others, it will not show why the client library is loading. So that is the major difference between embed and dependency. So by using both the properties, we can add the client library. So dependent client libraries we can add. So that is about the client libraries and that is how we can include the client libraries to a page level or a component level. Any questions? So what are the properties we can give to the client libraries? Dependency, hello proxy, categories, embed. So these are the properties we can give to the client libraries.